welcome to this webinar. So our talk tonight is by Wendy Collinson from Endangered Wildlife Trust. Wendy left the UK to pursue a career change in South Africa in 2005, and now she's still, 17 years later, she's still living her dream. She spent the first 6 years working with large carnivores in the South African bush, firstly through Global Vision International and then with the Endangered Wildlife Trust. She has worked alongside other researchers on several carnivore species that were fitted with radio tracking collars, which allowed them to be followed closely from a vehicle to gain an understanding of their movements and behavior. After 6 years of being involved in full-time carnivore research, Wendy moved on to a new project in which she examined roadkill rates and the effect of road mortality on biodiversity in the Greater Mapungubwe Transfrontier Conservation Area. This project led Wendy to obtaining a master's degree in zoology through Rhodes University. As I said, Wendy works for the Endangered Wildlife Trust in their Wildlife and Transport program and has done so for the last 10 years. The program examines the impact of roads on wildlife, and in the last 2 years, the program has expanded to rail ecology, looking at rail collisions with wildlife on railway lines. And most recently, further expansion includes airports, where the program is developing a wildlife hazard management program. So with that introduction, I'm going to hand over to Wendy and let her take over. There will also be a Q&A at the end, obviously, so please put your questions in Q&A, and if Wendy can't answer them, then we have Roland from Lowveld who will answer the actual duty questions that you may have. So welcome, Wendy, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Peter. Thanks for that kind introduction, and good evening to everybody. And thanks so much for joining. I'm sorry I look a little bit ghosty in my picture, but I'm also on load shedding, I think, like most of you, so I'm kind of sat here in the dark. But it's now become a way of life for us, hasn't it? But yes, I will share my presentation, and through the presentation I will explain to you some of the work that we've been doing in Kruger National Park, and also how you can help us, and what we've been doing so far with the honorary rangers. Just get the presentation up on my screen. Okay, Peter, if you could just let me know whether it's up on the screen.
It's on the screen, perfect, thank you.
Perfect, lovely. Okay, everyone, so as Peter said, I'm originally from the UK. I think you can probably tell that by my accent. And to just give you a little bit of a background, I came over here in 2005, originally just for 3 months, and I was working as a volunteer then on a research project in the Hoedspruit area. And as the saying goes, Africa gets under your skin, and it certainly did get under mine, and I just never went home, and ended up working for the Endangered Wildlife Trust, and began an enormous project over 10 years ago where we were looking at the impacts of roads on wildlife, and now we're actually doing some work in the national parks regarding animals being killed on roads. So just to give you an overview of the presentation that I'm going to give you this evening, I'm sure some of you, or hopefully most of you, know who the Endangered Wildlife Trust is, but I'll give you an introduction to them, what it is that we're studying, so why transport networks are so important and their consequences for wildlife, the data collection that we're actually doing and why we're doing it, how did the Kruger project start, so basically how you will fit into the bigger picture, what the research is, our findings, and how we are addressing the problem, i.e. the mitigation, what next for Kruger, and then on to who the Endangered Wildlife Trust are. So we are an organisation, it's a conservation NGO, and it is our 50th anniversary this year. And we looked at threatened species and their habitats across Africa. So it's not just Southern Africa where we work. We work in the South and also in East Africa. One of the largest conservation NGOs on the continent. And we function primarily through 3 pillars of sustainability. These are saving species, saving habitats, and benefiting people. Just to give you an example of how this would fit into the work that I do. So if you imagine that you have an animal that's killed on a road, in order to prevent that animal being killed, you need to conserve its habitat, so it has connectivity from one spot to another, so it can travel from one area to another without being killed on a road or a railway line, for example. And how that would benefit people is, i.e. their tourism experience would improve because they haven't got to see a dead animal on the road. And also from a safety perspective, they wouldn't necessarily be involved with an animal vehicle collision, hence being injured or even dying. So the work that I do has a 3-pillar impact. So the Wildlife and Transport Programme, it's one of 9 programmes at the EWT, and we have various stakeholders that we work with. It's actually our 10th birthday this year, and we've done several projects over the last 10 years. We have been working at our airports, where we've been looking at how to reduce collision work with birds and wildlife. Even though we've only been working 10 years formally, we do have 15 years worth of wildlife collision database for roads, i.e. roadkill. We also have a very strong understanding of what best practice is needed to prevent animals being killed on roads, preventing collisions at airports, as well as on railway lines. And in order to empower people, we do a lot of training with the route patrollers who patrol the toll routes across the country, as well as the staff at Lanseria International Airport, where, again, we train them in species identification and how to identify dead animals, etc., that you find on the road or on the runway or on a railway. So that's the programme in a nutshell, and some of the work that I do. On a day-to-day basis, most of my work is spent in the office overseeing the projects, but I have several students and field workers who are based across the entire country, where they are undertaking all the field work necessary for this work to be undertaken. So let's just get down to the nitty-gritty and look at actually what the problem is. So the threat that much of our wildlife is under is development. And we know that development is critical for a third world nation to become a first world nation. It's necessary for us to catch up with the rest of the world. So as part of that development, we need a functioning transport system. And just to put this into perspective, the amount of roads that we have on the planet, there's about 50 million kilometres of public road, which that's about 2,200 times around the equator. There's about 750 million vehicles on the road. And if we look at this map currently in front of us, you'll see that it shows the globe, and the very dark areas are where there are very few road networks, and the whiter areas are where there's quite extensive road networks. And what's quite interesting here is that we can see that in Europe, it's predominantly white, as is North America, and that's where we have most of our road networks. And then if we look at Africa, we can see that in the Sahara section, there's hardly any roads. The further south that we come, particularly into the SADC region, into the Southern African region, it becomes more white. And if I just go into a closer detail, you can see that around Gauteng and around the northwest and Mpumalanga, there's quite extensive road networks, and as you go over towards the Northern Cape and certain sections of the Western Cape, there's less of a road network. So you can see that there's quite extensive development in the country, but then we also do have some quite pristine wilderness areas, and this is why it's so critical that we do protect these areas from all of the threats, not just roads, but all of the threats that they may face. So as I said, even though we are considered a first world country, we are very third world in many respects, but our transport system is, as we can see from the previous maps, it's quite well developed compared to the other countries in Africa. And it is critical that we do have a functioning system. Otherwise, we're just never going to be able to compete with the rest of the world. So it's about finding a win-win between biodiversity and transportation. I do apologise to my dogs. I get very excited. So you are going to hear dogs barking every so often. I just hope it's not too distracting. So with that in mind, even though it's critical that we need transportation in order to keep up with the rest of the world, there are negative consequences that comes with having a functioning transport system. I'm not going to make any apologies for these photographs because I think they speak for the threat that wildlife is facing. But you'll see here roads, rail and airports. And most of it's collisions, whereby in the top left-hand corner we can see that there was an elephant, and this was in Pongola in Zululand, where an elephant was killed on the railway line. Then we have an owl on the road. One of our other images is of bird strikes on a runway. And then in addition to collisions, we also have the impacts of transportation through noise pollution, vehicle emissions, so numerous threats that we have to deal with on a day-to-day basis. And it's not just wildlife that have to deal with this, it's us as humans as well. So we think about smog effects in the cities from wildlife vehicle emissions. It's across the entire planet. So really, one of the jobs that we are or one of my jobs is how do we address this? How do we find that sweet spot, that win-win, so that we still have transportation, it still functions to the best of its ability, but it's sustainable, it's green, it protects our biodiversity. And this is where the Endangered Wildlife Trust comes in with the work that we've been undertaking. So for the last 10 years, we've had a project whereby we have been asking members of the public to send in their roadkill data reports. And this map just shows you an example of where data has been submitted from across the country. The very, very dark areas are where there's quite intense reporting, and then you'll see some areas of the country where it looks like there's hardly any roadkill at all. Just bear in mind that this map actually is a report. It's where people have reported their sightings. It doesn't necessarily reflect what is truly happening. So, for example, if we look at the Northern Cape, it looks like there's hardly any roadkill at all, but we do know it happens over there. It's just that there are less roads. But the thing with having a map like this, where people can submit their reports, it gives you a snapshot in time of what's going on and potentially identify where you therefore might want to undertake further research projects. So this map can be turned into what we call a hotspot map. And the map on the right here shows you bright red areas compared to yellow and green areas. bright red area is where there's quite significant amounts of roadkill compared to other areas in, well, where there's white, where there's nothing, and green, where it's a potential problem. And you can see that on the map where we're heading towards Swaziland, there's the quite bright red area there, which is the southern section of Kruger, and heading up into the northern section as well, that's identified as a target area for roadkill occurrence. We're also very active on social media, and for those of you who are quite active, you'll have seen some of our activities on Facebook, LinkedIn and Twitter, where we post some of the research that we undertake. And it was actually as a result of social media that we started the project in Kruger, because it was as a result of an image like the one that I've just put in front of you that was posted by a member of the public who had seen a hippo that had been killed on a road in the national park. Now, this is something that should not be happening in a protected area. Protected areas are supposed to be the sworn custodians of biodiversity, and yet we are seeing animals killed on a daily basis. And very often, unfortunately, the culprits or the finger is often pointed at staff. And this is something that we're going to discuss just now with some of our research findings that do actually suggest otherwise. The thing with images like this, though, is that visitors just do not want to see dead animals on the roads. It's not why they've come to the country. And a dead animal in a national park has a huge impact on the tourism industry, especially when the tourism industry is one of the top 3 revenue earners for the country. So we do need to address it. Not only do we need to address roadkill on the roads outside of protected areas, but we also need to address what's happening inside our protected areas. So back in 2014, we started a project called the Roads in Parks project, where we identified 6 parks across the entire country, and we determined the selection of these parks based on where they were. So obviously each area of the country has a different type of habitat. They have different species there. They also have different tourists visiting, different tourism numbers. So we wanted to get an understanding across the entire country. So we selected different ones. And each year we've been going in and out of the parks and doing different types of research. So back in 2014, the project actually started in Pilanesberg. So it wasn't a sandparks project initially, we started in Pilanesberg. And the overall goal of the project back then was to firstly try and understand the causes of roadkill in protected areas, and then to look at what we could do to reduce the rates. So we firstly started with driving the roads every single day over a 30-day period, trying to find what roadkill we could see on the roads. So people generally do drive quite slowly in the parks because they're looking at what's in the bush. We also drove slowly, but rather than looking at what's in the bush, we were looking at what was on the road. And here we can see that from a 30-day period in Pilanesberg, we found primarily amphibians, followed by reptiles, then birds, mammals, and then there were a few unknowns. There were some splats that we just had no idea what they were. It was literally a blood stain. We couldn't even determine whether it was a mammal or a bird because there were no feathers or fur or even scales. So this was one of the first things we did, just to get an idea of what was going on. From there, we then did some questionnaire surveys with visitors to the park. And some of the questions we asked them were, where do they think most roadkill happens? Is there more roadkill in a protected area, or is there more roadkill outside of a protected area, i.e. on your regional and national roads? And what are the main causes of roadkill? So most of the visitors to the park believed that there was less roadkill inside a protected area, and almost 100% of the people gave speeding as the sole cause of roadkill outside of protected areas, as they did for inside national parks. So it was unanimous that the main cause of roadkill inside or outside of your protected areas was purely a matter of speeding. So given that this is a scientific project, we set out to test if this was correct, and we set up in Pilanesberg what are called traffic loops. They're basically tubes that you put on the road, and they will assess for the number of vehicles that drive on that road every single day. It will also tell you the speed of that vehicle, and it will also tell you the type of vehicle, so the axle. So the graph that I've put up in front of you here shows you the number of vehicles that we had driving at different types of the day on this road, and the speeds that they were going and the type of vehicle. So the orange line shows you that it was a light vehicle, i.e. just a car or an SUV. And the blue line shows that it was a heavy vehicle. So that might have been a game driving vehicle or a truck. And you can see how many vehicles were actually speeding and the speed that they were going at. It also shows you the time of day when the speeding happened. And this is what I find most interesting, and I think makes most sense as well, because we can see that there's two spikes of when speeding happened. The middle of the day, which is when people are rushing to come back from their game drive and get back to the rest camps or get to the restaurants. And then the end of the day, when they are rushing again to get back to the rest camp or to exit the gate. So speeding did occur in the park. We know it happened, but there were peak times when it happened. It wasn't consistent throughout the whole day. We also found that whilst people were speeding, they weren't speeding excessively. So in Pilanesberg, the speed limit is 40 kilometres an hour. The maximum speed limit in Kruger is 50. So if we look at this chart here, we'll actually see that there was only almost 30% of the people who were speeding just above the 40 kilometre mark. Again, it wasn't excessive. So even though we recognised that speeding was an issue in Pilanesberg, it didn't seem to be the main cause for why animals were still being killed on roads. There had to be another reason. And it was whilst I was out driving one day, scratching my head, thinking, there's got to be a reason why animals are being killed on the roads. It's not just speeding. And this often happens in research. You kind of hit a brick wall where you don't actually know what the answer is. And I was driving back from a day in the field. It was about 5:30 in the afternoon, and I got caught in a roadblock in Pilanesberg. And it was a roadblock of people around a herd of giraffe who were right next to the road. Really, really beautiful sighting, lots of people taking amazing photographs. All I wanted to do after a whole day of work was to get back to the research camp and have, my glass of beer and sit and type up my notes. And yet I was caught in this roadblock. Couldn't do anything, just had to wait. There were obviously other people in a similar hurry and wanting to move quickly. And I was staring at the ground, at the road, as I normally do, because that's the job that I do. I'm looking for animals on the road. And as I was looking at the ground, I saw this beautiful tiger snake. And I was admiring it. And next minute, this guy comes driving next to me and he's looking out the window. He's not speeding, he's looking out the window and he's looking at the giraffes, and he's not looking at the road. And as he drives past me, he drives over the snake. And that was when I had my epiphany. That's when I realised it isn't necessarily the speeding, it's how people behave. This guy didn't deliberately drive over the snake. He was busy enjoying his experience with the giraffe. He was looking at the bush. He wasn't looking at the road. And it happened so quickly, there was nothing that I could do to stop it. But it was the epiphany moment for me when I realised that roadkill isn't just a result of speeding, and that other factors are involved, potentially due to driver behaviour. And therefore, what can we do to prevent this happening in future? Can we use signage? And how effective would these signs be at changing driver behaviour? So these were our next lot of research questions. Now, I'm sure many of you have already seen this sign. These signs seem to drop out of the sky and be placed anywhere on our roads in any part of the country. And to be honest with you, I find them quite meaningless. It's an image of a kudu, and it doesn't necessarily reflect the animal that is in the vicinity. Most of us become habituated to these signs so that we just completely ignore them, or we drive the road so often that we just even forget they're there. So yes, the country do have signage that is supposed to be used, but we don't know how effective it is, and I think we can probably agree together that it's not 100% effective. So what we decided to do as an organisation from the EWT was come up with some new designs for signs. And given that the project started with social media, we went back to social media and we undertook a poll. Now, when I say we undertook a poll, we looked at our roadkill database, so animals that were killed most often on the roads. So this included a cheetah, a snake, a chameleon, and a cheetah. And we asked people to rank them in order of if they saw a sign of one of those images, which of those images would they most likely change their behaviour for. And even though I know many of you probably can't respond now, I'll be very interested to know how many of you would change your behaviour, and if you had to rank those signs, which of those signs you would probably rank as being the most important to the least important. So what we found from the poll that we did on social media was that, in first place, people said that if they saw an image of a cheetah on a road sign, they would most definitely change their behaviour. They would drive slowly, they would stop, they would be a lot more cautious. And the snake was the image that most people said that they would least likely change their behaviour. So, in fact, a few people actually said if they saw that there was a sign saying that there were snakes in the area, they would deliberately look out for them so that they could drive over them on purpose, which again is interesting in itself because it shows the attitude towards snakes in general, and potentially why sometimes we do see snake roadkill. So given that the snake was the least popular and the cheetah was the most popular, we created some road signs that we then used in the national parks to test the responses to the signs based on how drivers would perform. So you'll see on the right here, we had the red triangle and with a silhouette of the animal in the middle. So we've got the snake and the cheetah. And then we also had a photograph of the snake and the cheetah as well. Now, in order to work out whether people did change their behaviour, we have in science what we call a response variable. All that means is that we had something that we needed to show whether there was a response or not. And the response in this case happens to be a fake rubber snake that we placed on the road, and then we hid in the bushes and we watched what people did. And when I say we watched what they did they drive over the snake? Did they stop? Did they swerve? Did they reverse back? So it was a case of how did people behave to seeing this image on the road? So we did this with signs there to see if the signs made a difference. And we also did it without any signs to see how people behaved towards our fake snake on the ground. So interestingly, when there were no signs present, there was definitely an interaction between speeding and driver occupation. So if we go back to the beginning when I showed you that image of the hippo killed on the road, and some of the comments there were attacking members of staff, saying that it's the staff that drive too fast, it's the staff that actually do all the roadkill. In this instance, we actually found that when driving below the speed limit, it was visitors who were most likely to hit the dummy snake than it was the staff. So this is quite important from a management perspective, a management tool, when parks come to designing their traffic management plans. So this was when we had no signs. There was a huge difference for when we did actually put the signs up. Once the signs were up, we found that 61% of drivers who drove past one of our road signs actually changed their behaviour when they saw the dummy snake on the road. This is compared to 35%. So there was a significant difference between no signs and when there were signs. And we found that overall there was a 98% change in driver behaviour. So what that means is that people did change, whether they swerved, whether they stopped or braked when they came to seeing the snake on the road with the signs. So from this, we can see that drivers do adapt their behaviour when it comes to signage, and that signage portraying a small animal is more effective. And this was the really interesting part of the research, because if we go back to the original poll, people actually said that if they saw an image of a cheetah, then they would be less likely to more likely to change their behaviour. We actually found the reverse to be true. We found that more people changed their behaviour when there was a snake image and a small species depicted on the photograph than there was a larger one. So with this in mind, this now takes us on to the Kruger project and what's happening next with regards to types of signage and where we will be working in the park. And this is where you now come in. This is where your role is going to take effect. So 2 years ago, we had a master's student who worked in the southern section of the park around the Skakusa area. And for those of you who do your patrols in the south, you'll be very familiar with this section of road. There's Skakusa over here to the right and Paul Kruger Gate over here to the left. Brilliant, our master's student, he drove 100 kilometres every single day on this route, and he recorded every single roadkill that he found on the road. And if we look at the colours on the road, you can see that he created this map for us with blue colours being what we call cold spots, where there wasn't much roadkill, yellow being moderate roadkill, so yes, there was some roadkill, and then the bright red areas being where there was quite a significant amount of roadkill. So we can see, if we just glance at this map fairly primitively, we see that there's this red area near Skakusa Camp, which, hazarding a guess, it's when people come out of the gate or go into the gate and they're speeding to get out onto their game drive or come in from their game drive. The area near Paul Kruger, again, a similar thing, coming in or exiting. There's a section here that's in yellow, which is quite a straight section. It's also quite an open section of land as well. For those of you familiar with that area, it's quite open vegetation. So even though you would expect to be able to see wildlife, if we go back to my example of the guy who drove over the snake when we were at the giraffe sighting, this is possibly a hotspot area for roadkill because people are busy scanning the bush because it's nice and open, and they're not actually looking at the road, and that's potentially a reason why roadkill could happen. So these are the hotspot areas in the south, and the areas that we are targeting as an organisation, and where you're coming in for where we need to be undertaking some of our patrols. So the patrols that we're going to be doing are similar to what we did in Pilanesberg, where we're using images of small animals and we're going to be placing them on the road. These are new signs that we had made up, and you can see that all of our logos are on there. The Sandparks logo, the Honorary Rangers logo, Ford Wildlife Foundation logo, because they have sponsored the project. There's also a QR code which links directly through to the EWT website, and that's going to be updated all the time. And we have given a specified distance for the hotspot. So it's for 2 kilometres, a 40-kilometre-an-hour limit, as opposed to the 50-kilometre-an-hour limit. And this is how we have to set them up. And Roland, Martin and Mandy, this is where maybe you might want to jump in at some point, because I know when I explained this when I came to Kruger and we did our training face-to-face, we got a little bit confused. But we have 2 signs that get placed up on the road, 2 kilometres apart. And the actual transect is 10 kilometres in length. So the reason why we have a 10-kilometre transect is because we have to have an area where what we call there being a control area and a buffer area that's in relation to the mitigation area. The mitigation area is what is known as the treatment section, so where the signs are, and the buffer area is between the mitigation and the control is where is what you would term as normal, where there's no interference or any treatment being used at all on our side. So we can compare what we find on the road between the control, the buffer and the treatment, count the roadkill in all of these sections and then compare them, and then effectively answer the question, do signs make a difference? So this is where your expertise will come in from your patrols. I think we're going to need to do a little bit more explaining of this just now, but I just wanted to outline what it's going to look like. I also want to take through with you how we're going to collect the data. So there's another little presentation that I'm going to do in a minute with how we collect the data using a cell phone app. But I think given time, given the time, and I know how people's laptop batteries are probably working with the load shedding, I might press on to the signs that we have posted in the park. I think some of you may have seen these already. We've got some posters that we put up at some of the various rest camps. Roland, Martin and Mandy, would it be a good idea maybe to stop for some questions now, or should I push on with how to work with the cell phone apps? I see we've got quite a few in the chat, quite a few in the Q&A. I'm just very conscious that people's laptop batteries may run out, mine included.
Roland, do you want to come in at this point?
Wendy, Peter, I can come in. Now, I don't know what specifically you'd like from me, but I can maybe just give you my experience. I was the lucky or unlucky one who did the first 3 patrols of our 6-week session, and that for me it was an eye opener. The very first thing that got me was I'm a keen conservationist, and I enjoy driving slowly through the parks. But for me, it was almost like a mindset change, moving from a game viewing experience to an observing or watching out for roadkill experience. And I can understand what you say when in the early example, when you said the person drove over the snake. It happens so easily. You really need to concentrate on the road if you want to avoid driving over a snake or something small in the road. That was my immediate thing, and I thought to myself afterwards, it's almost a spoiler in a way, because you're focusing so hard on the road to do exactly what you were saying, to avoid driving over the snake, that you might even miss the elephant that's 100 meters in the bush on the side of you. So that was the one observation, and the other observation, just whilst it's fresh in our heads with that 2 kilometer that you put up there, when we are doing our duties, we need to really be aware of where we are. The start of the treatment zone has got a big sign up, so that's easy, when you're in the treatment zone, and the end of the treatment zone has got a big sign up. But for the other 2 zones, you actually don't know where you are. And we try to put up some stopper posts, but we found that the bush sometimes is just too high to make them visible. So anybody doing the duties need to be very aware of the start of the 10-kilometer zone and the end of the 10-kilometer zone. So when you're picking up any roadkill, you know where to record it, because if we pick up roadkill and we put it into the wrong 2-kilometer section, it's really going to distort your data, and it's not going to give you the meaningful data that you want. So those are the two points that I'd really like to make.
Thanks, Roland. Wendy, I think carry on, and then we can have a session
Yeah.
at the end. Everybody talks.
Yeah, I agree. I've just looked at my battery and I see my battery's it's probably got about half an hour. I want to do the training with the cell phone app, and then I can switch across to my phone for questions. So rather whilst I've got a screen. So this is how you can help. And this is where the actual training takes effect. I'm not sure how many of you are working on watching this off your phones or watching it off laptops, but if you've got your phone, this is where I can help you with how to collect the data. I think I should emphasize, though, that it's not just about collecting roadkill data in the section that we're talking about. Basically, we need to know what is happening in the entire park. So if you are listening in and you're thinking, well, what's this got to do with me? I never go down to the Skakusa section. I work up in the north. It's to do with all of us. We need to know as much as we can from all of the park as much as possible. That way we can identify further hotspots and where we potentially need to put up more signage, because at the moment we've only got 4 signs. We need more signs. We know they work, but where we place them is the difference. And what I should also say is that the difference with these signs is that they are non-static. So when I say they're non-static, they can be moved around so that people don't become habituated to them. I mean, and that's the problem with the road signs that we have on the roads at the moment. They're static signage. We could forget that they're there. We could become habituated. Whereas if we have signs that get placed in different places at different times, might not necessarily be in the hotspot, but it's going to give people that little bit of a wake-up call, as in, oh, hang on a minute, I was speeding, I need to just slow down a bit. Ideally, we do want them in the hotspots, but we also want to raise awareness. So that's why any information that you can collect is really, really important. So this is what we're going to do now, is just data collection 101. So if you've got your phone, this is how you can get involved. You can either send me roadkill data via email. So if you see something, you can pop it onto an email and send it to roads@ewt.org.za. Most cell phones have a GPS that come with them, so your Google Maps will give you a pin drop of where that roadkill sighting is, so you can send it through via email. But what would make your life even simpler, or is if you download the cell phone app and start reporting. So this is what I'm going to try and take you through. So if you go into your Google Play on your cell phone app and type in EWT Roadwatch, this is what should come up in front of you. And I see that we are, Peter, just correct me, we are recording this, aren't we? So for those people, if I go too far, brilliant. So if I go too fast, there's always the recording to go back to. So I'm going to walk you through it. If you get lost, don't worry. I can either do another evening and we can go even slower, or we can do, you can go back to the recording. So whilst I've been nattering away, hopefully you've managed to find the EWT Roadwatch in the Google Play Store. So that was what you should have typed in, or you should have a Google Play icon. And your EWT Roadwatch, and it should be the paw print that comes up. And I can't give out any prizes, but I wonder how many of you know what paw print that is. And if you did guess, it's a cheetah. It's the EWT's logo. Okay, I hope I waffled enough there to, to make you all now have the app, because what you should now see in front of you is this. The EWT Roadwatch South Africa app, and you should be able to install it on your phone. And once you've installed it, then you should be able to open it. Some of you, if you're not on Android, you've got Apple, there may be a few hiccups. We are in the process of ironing out some of those hiccups. Don't just get frustrated and give up. Please let me know, because each of those hiccups seem to be quite unique to particular models. So if you are having a problem, either pop it in the chat now, or you can drop it to me in an email, or just let Peter know and he'll pass it on to me. But yeah, if there is a problem, then please just let me know. So hopefully you've all got this far and it's installed. And then once you've installed it, you then have to enter your contact details. So you only have to do this once. You don't have to do it every single time that you find a roadkill. And your contact details can either be a cell phone number or an email address. It's totally up to you. Otherwise, you can just leave the contact details blank. It's often nice to have them there, though, because it means that if we do need to contact you about anything that you've submitted, then it's there. All of the data that comes through to us, it only comes through to us. It doesn't get shared with anybody else, so your contact details aren't shared. So once you've done that, and hopefully you've managed to keep up, we can then do a little bit of a test. So you can either report your roadkill manually, or it does it automatically. Now, when I say automatically or manually, what I mean by this is sometimes when you're driving in an area, there's no cell phone signal. So what happens then is the app will remember your location so that when you get back into signal, it will then upload the roadkill that you observed. Manual reporting is if you didn't have time to stop. So maybe you saw a roadkill on a drive on a particular road. You're not 100% sure where on the road it was, but it was near to about 10 kilometres out of Hoodspray, let's say, for example. And you can then report it manually. So when you get back home, you can submit your sighting. So all my power should.
There's
Yes.
quite a few people popping up in the chat say they can't find it, and on my phone I couldn't find it either. It doesn't come up in the Google Play Store. So you might have to have someone look at that, and then people can load it later, perhaps.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm just going to keep taking you through the presentation. Like I said, it's recorded. Yeah, I can see all the comments coming up now. Yeah, it will come up, I promise you. I think because I'm rushing you as well, I'm not being able to help you individually. But let me take you through, and then we can always come back. So those of you who have managed to be lucky, you can do a test if you like. So if you want to report the roadkill automatically, you will click on your report roadkill, enter the animal details. So you can put in test, rather not put an animal in here, because otherwise there's going to be a massive dearth of roadkill across the entire Ormond Ranger network over this 1 minute period or something. So just put in test, and then you can submit with a photograph. This is just going through the same with manually. You can enter the latitude and the longitude GPS coordinates if you know them, and like I said, if you didn't know what the GPS coordinates are, the app will remember them. But then something I just want to emphasise, and like I said, I've started to rush through this a little bit now, because I know that some of you are probably still struggling to enter or try and get the app downloaded. Don't stress too much if you haven't managed to do it. Rather now just pay attention to the next bit of the presentation, because we can always go back, or we can always re-listen to the recording, or I can always do a one-on-one thing with you. But if you are going to collect roadkill, then we must also just make sure that you're safe as well. So only stop if it's safe to do so. I know it sounds like it's obvious, but sometimes we get so excited when we're part of a research project, even if it's a dead animal, that we stop and we don't realise that there's somebody behind us. Turn on your hazard warning lights. Avoid exiting the vehicle. So there shouldn't actually be any reason to get out of the vehicle. Even if you're taking a photograph, you should be able to lean out of the vehicle and take a photograph. The only reason that it may be necessary, and this is where you would probably need assistance from the actual Sam Park staff, was if it was a large animal and it needed to be removed from the road. Hence why you would need gloves to remove it. But in most instances, you shouldn't be getting out of the vehicle at all. When you're taking photographs, it's really important how that photograph is actually taken. It helps us with verification. So here's the same animal but taken from two different angles. Both photographs are absolutely fine. If anything, the one on the right is better because it shows the entire animal. The one on the left is useful because it shows that the area was quite open. You can see that the grass was quite high, but it's not thick bush. and it doesn't look like a particularly busy road. We can also see that it was a paved road versus a gravel road. So both very, very clear images. Also try, if possible, to take it from the top, even if it's not a specimen that's in perfect condition. So you'll see here the specimen on the left is in perfect condition, but the one on the right, it's not so clear. For those of you who are very, very good at birding, you can probably recognise what it is. For those of you who aren't, it would simply go down as an unknown bird species, but it's still a roadkill. So even if you can't recognise it, we still need it, the data gathering. Very often with snakes, they are twisted in all sorts of positions. Take a photograph as you find it. Again, preferably not getting out and putting the snake into a position where you can photograph it from a better angle, because you're never 100% sure whether the thing's dead or not. So I'd rather you didn't tamper. Where possible, just try and get as best a photograph as possible when it comes to your reptiles. And then, of course, there are going to be images where you can barely recognise what they are. I mean, here on the left, we know it's a mammal because we can see fur, we can see a tail, possibly a small rodent, but apart from that, we have no idea, but it's a roadkill. And the same with the image on the right as well, unknown bird. And then we take it down to a stage even further. The image on the right there is just a blood stain. That's a roadkill, have no idea what it is. We could maybe go and look a little bit closer. There might be some remains of hair, there might be some scales, which would then indicate whether it was a bird, a mammal or a reptile, but we know there was a roadkill there, and that would simply go down as unknown. So that's how we take our photographs. And I think with that in mind, I mean, I'm not sure how many of you managed to keep up. I might need to assist some of you a little bit more remotely, but Peter, that's kind of the presentation for now.
So once again, from me, thank you to everybody who took part tonight. Thank you for all of those that were able to join us and stick with us for the entire thing. We had over 200 people at the peak of the thing, so I think a lot of people picked up a lot of information. So once again, from me, thank you very much for joining us. Thank you, and good night all. Thank you, Andy.
Thank you very much. Thanks, guys. Good.